Arc 5, Stars that Engrave History. Chapter 26, Spear of Love. The already dire situation had deteriorated drastically, resulting in the worst of awful conditions. Subaru trembled under Sirius's mesmerized gaze and her shuddering, blowing breaths. The madwoman gave no regard to the heat scorching her bandaged face, her attention focused on watching Subaru. No, not just watching, but staring. Subaru, dear. Betelgeuse? That was the name of a madman which Subaru had never wanted to hear again. When Sirius Romani Conti had been crying out for her lover, Subaru would be lying if he said that this particular theory hadn't crossed his mind. Even so, he was reluctant to seriously consider it, as doing so would combine the existence of the lunatic Betelgeuse and the madwoman Sirius. He didn't want to think of a union, the worst possible couple, with Romani Conti. Subaru, a couple where both lovers are sin archbishops, is ridiculously disastrous, although it can't be helped that he'd choose a bride like that. Really, the witch cult didn't have a single normal member. The self-righteous Betelgeuse, Sirius who imposed her love without permission, and Regulus who treated love as superficial fate, they were all scum. Subaru, like how your names are bit similar. Do they all end in an S sound? Subaru buried the rapid churning of his mind under trivial, pointless thoughts. Right now, Subaru felt as if he'd found something very awry, although he could quite put his finger on what it was. Try as he might, he couldn't find it. Sirius, please don't be so silent, Betelgeuse. You're such a mean-spirited person. See, you're already giving me that usual cold attitude. It makes me really anxious. Sirius, unaware of the cause of Subaru's brooding silence, took her own interpretation of it, as she kept her hands on her face and her waist twisting back and forth. The nightmarish scene spread as the crowd around Sirius took up her strange, delusional expression of affection. Regulus. Really, I can't deal with you anymore. Although his trick just now probably that gave you that kind of idea, it's still really rather tragic. The correct connection of fate should place you together no matter what kind of obstacles are faced. Like with me and my brides. However, a separation by life and death before results can blossom is not only sad, but very unsightly. Sirius, yes, thank you very much. I'm very sorry. Now, excuse me, but I'm busy. You know, right? Mutual understanding is important. Mutual concessions are also important. You have completed your purpose, so could you leave as soon as possible? After all, I also have my own private affairs. Regulus, indeed, my purpose of finding my bride has been fulfilled. Sirius's madness had given way to rationality, and Regulus overlooked that implication as he looked at Amelia, still in his arms. Then he turned toward Subaru. Regulus, but the one who wants to kill me and my bride, and who has been annoying since the very beginning has yet to allow me proper vengeance in an infringement of my rights. I dislike taking a violent initiative, but in this case, it would only be a just revenge. Yes, this is an act of righteousness. Although I could endure this and leave, I would be doing legitimacy a disfavor. That is to say, leaving would be a loss of justice. I shouldn't set that precedent. Subaru, don't give me that superious tone. Obviously, you don't like me so you want to kill me. Don't justify that with some garbage doctrine. Regulus, actually being talked back to is quite a surprise. Being spoken to as if I were mistaken is even more of a surprise. Are you the type of people who disagrees with their opponents? In that case, the only thing I can say is that you're small and superficial. I think that this kind of person, who can't listen to the words of others with sincerity, will one day earn their just deserts. What do you think? Subaru, do you have the right to say this? Regulus's eyes widened as if incredibly taken aback. Perhaps he was sincere, convinced that his speech was justified. No, he was absolutely convinced. If not, he couldn't be a leading subordinate in that abnormal cult. Logical conversations were only an illusion. Although they spoke the human tongue, they were creatures belonging to an alien ecosystem. Forgetting that would lead to being swallowed up by their honeyed words. Regulus, Sirius. You seem to have excluded him from your sphere of power. What happened? Instead of facing the silent Subaru, Regulus directed the conversation to Sirius. Frowning at his speech, Subaru discovered that the fear which had been gripping his heart had vanished. The fact that Beatrice was still slightly trembling on his shoulders proved that they hadn't left the range of the sphere of influence. In other words, only Subaru had been excluded. And the reason for that was... Sirius, isn't that obvious? Since I know that he's that person, if I continue to share my feelings, they might accidentally transmit to him. Regulus, don't give me that shy look, it's really creepy. Having proclaimed your love, there's no point in pretending to innocent. I really don't understand you. Sirius, don't you think that allowing those inexplicable feelings that can't be expressed with words to be felt in such a manner is tasteless? Until the end of the end, until the very moment I become one with him, I'll seal that feeling inside me. I've already decided so. Yes, for the sake of love. Regulus, because of that dishonesty, your important feelings will never be able to reach him, you know? You, Sirius Romani Conti, can only miss him with wholehearted continuous thoughts. Don't you think that using someone else's family name is rather disgusting? I suppose that, in a sense, it's like Betelgeuse' legacy. Well, he's already dead, so it doesn't matter anymore. Sirius, I'm in love with that person. Hearing Regulus's amazed speech, Sirius exploded. The madwoman grasped at her hair in a frenzy, spittle flying from her mouth as she screamed at Regulus. Sirius, after all, whenever I gazed at him, he always met my eyes. When I touched him, he didn't scold me. When I spoke to him, he gave me his attention. When I inhaled his breath, he never told me off. I was allowed to sleep with him. I could freely borrow his things. He allowed me the honor of burning the half-witch. He gave me my name. He smiled for me. Only for me. Only for me, only for me and for me and for me. Her breathing grew wild as she sobbed tears of unrequited love. She made herself clear. Sirius's existence was one of dark, twisted, pure love. Regulus, oops. Dealing with such strong subjective convictions is tricky. Shrugging, Regulus spoke as if seeking agreement from Subaru. Subaru bit back at do you have the right to say that to keep Regulus from lashing out. He needed to temper the balance between the two foolish extremists near him. Facing the two cultists, Subaru saw no light of hope to break the deadlock. Rather, the situation had worsened due to Sirius's interference. Even if Subaru had broken away from the shared fear, there would be no marked improvement in his combat power. Obviously, Beatrice would be his main advantage, but she was trapped in an unfavorable condition, her sharp judgment dulled by terror. At least, only facing Regulus would help. Subaru, hey, Sirius. Sirius, yes, what's the matter, my dear? Sirius candidly responded his call. Although Subaru astonished at the unexpectedly serious response. Subaru, I have a little bit private business with Regulus here, so could you wait patiently for a while? Please? Sirius, do you want me to wait? Making use of Sirius's misunderstanding could grant Subaru a chance at victory. Sirius appeared to have assumed Subaru was Betelgeuse due to his invisible providence, which resembled the authority of Sloth's unseen hand. Although this was a dark path, Subaru would have to tread it. Betelgeuse had been a spirit. If he were still alive, it was entirely possible that he would have possessed Subaru as his next host. Although, the problem would be that Subaru hadn't indicated that he'd recognized Sirius up until now, but Sirius, in her present state of mind, hadn't seemed to notice the issue. With that in mind, Subaru hoped to break that deadlock. The result. Sirius, I'm sorry, I cannot do that. Please let me refuse even if it is very important to you. Sirius ruthlessly rejected his plea. Seeing Subaru's disappointed gaze, Sirius bowed her head. Sirius, of course, I originally wanted to comply. But the diligent you have surely already decided that while I wait, you'll slip far away from my extended fingers. I know you. After all, we've been together for so long. You'll try your utmost and overstrain yourself alone to reach your desired results, and... In all honesty, Subaru couldn't help but feel a heartfelt admiration for her love. Even so, Sirius's regard of Betelgeuse's hard-working nature was a rather blind perspective. After all, the witch cult existed to do nothing but harm. Sirius, finally we were able to meet again. It's been a whole year, since I've been at your side. In this century, this is the longest we've been apart. And even after a year of not seeing me, you ask me to leave? I don't want to. I can't. In your period of absence of the period, I always wanted to become one with you. Subaru. Sirius, on top of that, you still want me to wait. And now you have a spirit who I've never seen before. Where did you find her? What exactly is appealing about woman like that? She's tiny, her face is arrogant, and she has neither the chest nor the bottom of a woman. Is it because she's a spirit? Because you're a spirit, your woman has to be a spirit too? The time we spent together loses to such a flimsy reason? I'll burn you. The direction of her speech became perverse, and became weird, and a crazed shimmer of unbridled frenzy rose in her gaze again. The crowd also left courting affection for anger, blood streaming red from their eyes and noses. Sirius, and is the reason you need to deal with Regulus the half-witch in his arms? That filthy half-witch. That silver-haired half-witch. Why are you so partial to her? Stop immediately, shouldn't you have understood that long ago? That despicable, loathsome, hateful, abhorrent garbage witch. If you revive her, I'll burn her before your very eyes. Subaru, you're so increasingly incomprehensible, you. The madwoman gave a bloodthirsty shriek, revealing her animosity toward both Amelia and the Witch of Envy. Wasn't the goal of the witch cult the Witch of Envy's resurrection? Subaru couldn't understand Sirius's utter loathing for her then. Rather, Sirius had absolutely no resonance with the Betelgeuse she longed for. Although he'd originally thought that they couldn't have been companions, they turned out to be nothing but enemies. Subaru. The impasse between the three resurfaced. Regulus planned to kill Subaru and Sirius. Sirius would defend against Regulus and the non-existent Betelgeuse within Subaru. Subaru wanted to rescue Amelia from Regulus and to free Tina from Sirius and, if possible, kill the two archbishops. Obviously. However, the situation Subaru was in was far too harsh. Searching for such a solution that Subaru didn't have the ability to attain, his forehead began to bead with sweat. Return by death, followed by Sirius's appearance and Regulus's debut. After that, a melee battle between and with the archbishops. This loop had been the longest yet. During that period of time, although he'd retrieved useful intelligence, nothing but awful things had happened. Subaru. Biko. Beatrice, you can try either one in fact. From his back came the timid voice of Subaru's support. Subaru, who held authority over what would happen next, made his decision. And at that time. Regulus, oh. Sirius, hook. Simultaneously, both Regulus and Sirius both changed their attitude. They each put their hands into their coats and, from there, retrieved their books. Subaru, that is. A familiar book with a heavy black binding. At this proximity, there was no way that Subaru could have been mistaken. That was what the witch cult obeyed above all else, the gospel. Regulus and Sirius. Ignoring Subaru, who'd raised his guard again, the two archbishops opened their gospels and surveyed its writ. Then, although their timing had been identical, their expressions gave stark contrast to each other. Regulus, I assume the content is the same for both of us, is that true, Sirius? Sirius, shut up, Regulus. Why now? When finally I found him again. Regulus wore a light smile, and Sirius, who gritted her teeth and spoke in a voice full of remorse. Even if the predator and the madwoman held opposing feelings, their wills were unified. The two looked to Subaru. Regulus, although I'm sorry, it's time now. My free time with you has ended. You should thank the gospel. Well, that's not right. That doesn't make sense. After all, what's the use in being thankful to paper? So, rather, you should be grateful to me, who follows the gospel faithfully. Subaru, thank you for your faith, but what was that about time? What are you talking about? Regulus, it's just as you heard. We were given free time before we need to do what must be done. I took that meaningful time to retrieve my bride. Sirius, I feel incomplete. In front of that person, I shouldn't be subjected to such treatment. It's too cruel. I'm being washed away by sadness, don't you know? Regulus spoke with composure, while Sirius forcibly expressed her sorrow. The crowd collapsed, and Beatrice bit back her tears. However, Subaru and Regulus both remained completely unaffected. Regulus, sorry, but your small, superficial love doesn't touch my complete self at all. At most, it makes me feel a little dirty. In a contemptuous voice, Regulus, with Amelia still in his arms, turned his back to Subaru. Really, he looked as if he were just planning to let them go. If Regulus left by himself, that was fine. But... Subaru, stop, you bastard. Don't just run off. Let her go. Otherwise, I'll... Regulus, I considered that. Subaru. Regulus stopped and only turned his head to smile. Under that smile, Subaru felt as though a blade brushed his spine, and he swallowed, his entire body stiff. It was impossible to prevent Regulus's next move. Regulus, I think that if my bride finds one of her attendants gone, she'll be lonely, and if I don't invite enough people, she'll be rather fickle. So I won't kill you. Regulus tapped the ground gently with his toes. Although it was a gesture of comfort, as if adjusting his shoes, his foot dug neatly into the stone slab as if it were a shovel driving into soft ground. The wreckage of the slate flew toward Subaru. Bullets of soil seemed to defy gravity. Some of them brushed the outside of Subaru's right foot. And in the next moment, Subaru's foot vanished. Subaru? A beast's claw had torn clear through his foot. On his right foot, the white of bone, pink of flesh, and yellow of marrow were cleanly exposed in a twisted cross-section. His veins had all been severed, blossoming with blood. Before he could comprehend what had just happened, the pain struck. Subaru, hook. Huck. A-H-H. The world became pure white, as if his head were being punctuated by countless sharp needles. A scream lodged in his throat. Subaru was unable to support his own weight as he tumbled to the ground. His outstretched fingers desperately held his right leg. The wound was so large that the palm of his right hand couldn't cover it. Beatrice, Subaru. Subaru. Subaru, wait, I suppose? Right now. Beatrice fell to the ground with the discovery of the Subaru's severe injury, and panicked as she began a chant of healing magic. Regulus nodded in satisfaction at the scene. Regulus, this is adequate retaliation for your reckless behavior up until just now, so I'll let it go. Although I did consider the possibility of you doing it again, I think I still want to look forward to your future. This pain is sure to stop you if you're considering hurting another person again. Don't thank me. Just save someone else next time. Subaru, hook. Ka, ga, can't, kuu, ga. Pain, agony, suffering, third. A haze of agony. Molars being ground to dust from gnashing. A flashing world. The absence of an up and down. Was he sleeping? Or was he alive? Or maybe he was dead. Confusion. Cluelessness. Noidia. Even so, there was something he needed to know. Subaru, Emily, Wait, ga hook, wait hook. Beatrice, Subaru, you can't afford to mess around. If you have to vomit, turn to the side. If you don't, your throat will. Enduring pain and madness, Subaru moved his head. His heart beat like an alarm bell, and he began to choke up what felt like his organs. The petite Beatrice, while desperately supporting Subaru's body, did her best to cast healing magic. However, someone was laughing at her. Beatrice, you can't be serious, in fact. Serious, I'm sorry. However, this obviously isn't a joke. Isn't that obvious? Behind Beatrice, in abhorrent whispers, Sirius replied in a dark tone. Around Sirius, a crowd of people rolled as they screamed in pain. All of them, with their hands on their right leg wound, desperately sought salvation. Like Subaru, their right feet had been torn off by a beast. Sirius, my beloved Betelgeuse would say that feeling pain is living, and that those feelings allows love to be exercised. I know what better than anyone. However, I believe there is a better way of representing that form of love until then. Thank you. That representation would be becoming one. After all, love is a prayer for becoming one. Seeing the same sights, feeling the same emotions, living the same life, ending with the same death, that is love. Opening her hands hit each other in a burst of clapping. Sirius gave harsh puffs of air as she fixed her intense, envious gaze on Beatrice. Sirius, no matter who, everyone should experience the same feelings as him. However, only you and that dirty half-witch will be denied that experience. Who would grant you such an honor? Beatrice, there's no other woman out there who would be driven as mad with jealousy as you. But it doesn't matter, since Betty has long been Subaru's closest confidant. Betty is Subaru's. Beatrice refused to flinch under Sirius's cruel words. Madwoman and Spirit glared at each other, until Sirius turned away, breaking the interaction. Sirius, now, I can only entrust him to you. After all, I have to prioritize the Gospel's instructions. Yes, there is no other way. I'm sorry. You know I want nothing but to return to you as soon as possible. At this moment, Sirius still acted mad in love with Subaru. The madwoman left the bloodstained square. Quite unexpectedly, Beatrice did not give chase. She understood that refusing to allow her to escape would nearly result in more sacrifices. Beatrice, Subaru. With fluttering eyes, yellow bubbles burst from Subaru's mouth. Beatrice pressed her palm against his wound, attempting to stop the flow of blood. The wound was too deadly, any slip in concentration would lead to Subaru's death. For Beatrice, saving Subaru was, naturally, her greatest priority. Although, there was another priority Beatrice had to follow. Subaru, if you don't treat the other injured people. However, the number of wounded people rolling around the square was over 30. They had all suffered the same injury as Subaru, and in a cruel twist, the healing being performed on Subaru hadn't reached them. She would need to heal every injury individually. That was the burden Beatrice needed to take up. But, even if she exhausted her store of mana, she wouldn't be able to bear it. Beatrice, Subaru, I'm sorry, in fact. Desperately trying to heal Subaru's injury, determined to keep a strong facade, Beatrice spoke with a hoarse voice. A stream of tears flowed down her white cheeks. Beatrice, I'm sorry. Beatrice voiced a string of constant apologies. Even though she knew her voice could not reach Subaru, rendered unconscious by pain. Even if she knew that she could solve nothing. Beatrice, I'm sorry, Emilia. Sirius had created so many victims and left the plaza. Regulus had taken Emilia with his overwhelming power. The two Sin archbishops strode into the city of Pristella. Chapter 27 Noise. A piercing sound. Abrupt, vibrating, heavy, empty, distant, nearby. The flow of his blood dulled, as if his blood vessels were infected by an inflow of sludge. His organs were sluggish, as if filled with clay, and oxygen didn't reach his brain, leaving his thoughts foggy and unreliable. The vibration was in his nearby vicinity, the sound shaking the membrane of his skull, traveling through his bones to his hands and feet. The darkness he'd become used to faded for a sudden white light, which his eyes were unable to accept. In that white light, forms and shapes moved about, as if children had cast paint everywhere in a room of white. The heavy sound faded, and, as his eyes moved under their lids, his body had entirely burned out. Accompanied by nausea and sluggishness, Subaru slowly opened his eyes. Everything became distant as he entered a calm world, and, after tens of seconds, his eyes were restored to their original state, as darkened rooms and dirty ceilings opened. He felt the breaths of many bodies moving around and keeping busy in his surroundings. People moving around in order to keep the surroundings busy, and their bodies. Hey, bro, you're awake. Ears ringing with tinnitus, Subaru, attacked by a sudden sound with an unnecessary amount of strength, focused on it. Cat-eared young lady over here. Everyone else, keep working. Sorry, but keep working. We're fighting against time. Really, Niao, you're annoying. People need quiet here, so quickly get back to work. With a bow of his head, the large beast man apologized for his loud voice as he was approached by an angry young woman, no, young man. Wearing a revealing dress, a blood-stained Ferris looked at Subaru with a sigh of relief. Ferris, now that you've woken up, do you understand the situation? Actually, can you speak right now? Subaru. Ah, Ferris? Ferris, yep, it's everyone's favorite Ferry-chan. You're not Suki Subaru, and we're at a field hospital right now since you were heavily injured, got it? Ferris quickly explained the situation to a hoarse Subaru. Reluctantly, his brain digested his speech word by word. Looking around, Subaru identified his surroundings. At last, he noticed that he was lying on a simple bed made of pieces of cloth. Then, as Ferris said, this looked like a field hospital. People lay writhing in pain, awaiting treatment like Subaru's. The taste of blood, a miserable, whispered cry. Just healing magic couldn't keep up, and needles and sutures were introduced to wounds. Subaru, what exactly is happening? Ferris, looks chaotic, doesn't it? Slowly, try to remember what happened before you fainted. If you recall that, you'll find the answer. Ferris's words weren't gentle, but that wasn't a matter of his mood. Rather, he had no energy to spare for gentleness. His sleeves were rolled up, and his white skin and face were stained with blood. Imagining the volume of work that Ferris, a first-rate healer, would need to take on in the face of this tragedy wasn't difficult. And the cause of this tragedy was Subaru, the witch cult. Ferris, really, those guys are the worst. My understanding of them was too naive. I never expected them to pull something like this. Of course, no one else was expecting this either. Remorsefully biting his lips, Ferris lowered his chin at Subaru. The regret in Ferris was clear. Although Subaru understood that, there were other uncertainties. Subaru, Amelia. Where is Amelia? Is she here? Ferris. Subaru, that bastard, greed, the Archbishop took Amelia. Then, He quivered, coming to understand the cause of his restlessness. In Ferris's lowered gaze and silence, Subaru found a clear answer. At least, Amelia wasn't here. Then if his impression before passing out was right, she'd been taken by Regulus. Subaru, and Beatrice? The little girl who was with me. She has an arrogant, lovable face and curly hair. Beatrice? Amelia had more than likely been abducted by Regulus. Judging from Regulus's attitude, the likelihood that he would hurt Amelia, although uncertain, should be low. Although he couldn't be forgiven, that was the case. But what had happened to Beatrice? Sirius and Regulus had both been present, and Sirius had held a strong hostility toward Beatrice. Since Subaru had been safely carried into the field hospital, they escaped from Sirius. So who had protected Subaru? Subaru, hey please. Tell me. Beatrice. Ferris. Not finding an answer to his unease, Subaru desperately sought an answer from Ferris, who closed his eyes. The giant beastman standing next to him, Ricardo, the head of the Iron Fawn, looked to the side. Subaru followed his gaze. Subaru, Beatrice. Lying a ways from the people receiving treatment was a lone maiden in a dress. Seeing her sleeping in a makeshift bed like his own, Subaru went to lift the towel covering his stomach and run to her. However, halfway to his feet, severe pain crippled him. On top of that, his right foot stopped obeying him, and the system of his body broke down. His head was heavy with fatigue, and his right foot couldn't understand why it was unable to move. Hurrying to take a look, the horror of his own foot left Subaru speechless. Subaru, oh. Ferris, Subaru-kyun would have lost a foot without Beatrice's healing. You'll have to thank the child later. Subaru's right foot was missing about half of its flesh, and was obviously a different size from his left foot. It was also wrapped in several layers of thick bandages, and a board had been fixed to his heel. All those had caused him to lose his balance. He couldn't help but brush it with his fingers, and, in that moment, a bolt of realization struck him. Subaru, I remember. Regulus's last blow before he'd left. He'd taken Emilia, said some nonsense, and kicked the ground up as easily as he could kick sand, and the soil had struck Subaru's food. At that moment, Subaru's right foot had been wounded as if it had been mauled by a wild animal's claws. And that had resulted in the present state of Subaru's right foot. Ricardo, when I stumbled upon the scene, your foot was only connected by a few tendons. A crying little miss had been desperately healing it until we got you help. Ferris, after that, Subaru was carried here and treated by Fairy-chan. Although Fairy-chan's treatment can't guarantee that your foot will be the same as before, now the bones and nerves are linked, and the flesh is regenerating, so don't do anything to upset it. Crossing his wrists, Ferris made an X, prepared to deal with Subaru's reluctance. However, Subaru obeyed in silence, his attention more focused on Beatrice's bed. As Ferris sighed in relief, a large hand supported Subaru's shoulder, allowing him to slowly make his way to Beatrice. Ricardo, as for getting you to that little miss, I can handle that. Subaru, thanks, sorry about this. Ricardo, no worries. Ricardo moved Subaru's entire bed near Beatrice's. From there, Subaru leaned forward to take a better look at her. The little girl was sleeping so quietly that Subaru couldn't even hear her breathing. Even though she was a spirit, Beatrice slept like a human. Unlike Puck, she couldn't dematerialize, so this was how she reduced the burden of materialization on her mana. For this reason, seeing Beatrice's sleeping face was hardly uncommon for Subaru. Only, this was the first time he'd seen her sleeping so quietly. Subaru, she's just sleeping, right? Still, I'm worried. Ferris, asleep isn't the right word. Right now, she's lost her function as a spirit. A state of suspended animation might be closer. Subaru, suspended animation? Why? Touching Beatrice's forehead, he was surprised to find how low her temperature was. Brushing her eyelashes and her face yielded no reaction, just as Ferris had reported. In response to the look on Subaru's face, Ricardo squatted down. Ricardo, according to the cat-eared lady, this happened as the result of mana overuse, which indeed seems to be the case. I found the square you were in completely by accident, bro. Everyone there had almost the same injury, which the little miss was taking care of on her own. Subaru. Ricardo spoke with a sigh, leaving Subaru silent for a while. The same wound as Subaru that was the result of the Aban transmitting the injury Subaru had gotten from Regulus. Subaru attacking the feet of Regulus. Sirius certainly had complicated matters. The madwoman seemed to have left the scene, and Beatrice's fight had begun there. She'd given equally thorough treatment to Subaru and everyone else who was wounded. Of course, Subaru was a greedy man who asked for too much, and the child who accompanied that Subaru also refused to give up anyone. So Beatrice had squeezed every last drop of her mana dry to save all those people, at this heavy price. Subaru, Beatrice is fine, right? She just needs a little rest. Ferris. To be honest, I'm nigh too optimistic. Fairy-chan is a first-rate healer, but doesn't know much about spirits. And this child isn't an ordinary spirit either. So I don't really know any real solutions. Subaru, there has to be a way. If Beatrice can't be saved, It had only been a year. He had freed her from the archive in order to bring her happiness, and her life couldn't end here. Happiness, 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 no one deserves happiness more than this child. Then anyone should be happy. Child is not it. Ricardo, if she needs magic to be brought back, can't she take some from another source? If Bro is her contractor, then she should be able to get some from him, right? Ferris. Obviously, Subaru would easily be the source, but that idiot fractured his gate, so she can't use his mana. Subaru, right, baka fruits. With baka fruits, I can restore my own mana, and from there I can give some to Beatrice. Ferris, idiot. Ferris snapped angrily as he glared at the desperate Subaru. Subaru was surprised at that unexpectedly sharp reprimand, and Ferris immediately put on a fiddling, shy demeanor. Ferris, how many times have I said this? That's really dangerous for Subaru-kyun's body. In fact, it would be like poison. If you did that, we'd just end up with 2 casualties, so you can't. Subaru. Ferris's strict words were tinged with sadness. Reading that sincere thought, Subaru closed his mouth and swallowed his reckless judgments. Ferris was an expert in healing, so he had of course considered a myriad of ways to help Beatrice. Subaru's sudden thought must have already been considered. Ferris, I can understand Subaru's worry about Beatrice John. And although I understand, there's nothing we can do for her right now. There are many other things that we have to worry about than just that child. Subaru, Beatrice. Right, there's Amelia too. Ferris's words brought Subaru back to reality. He turned his attention to the field hospital and found that something was off. There were people with wounded right feet, the same injury as Subaru, but there were also plenty of people with different injuries. Subaru, how's the situation? No, what else has happened? What's with all the injuries? Ricardo, the witch cult is here like you said, bro. Subaru, but it can't just be them, right? I only saw 2 archbishops. This level of harm can't be enacted by just 2 people. In other words, they've brought the fodder cultists too. The 2 archbishops were ridiculously powerful. So Subaru had simply assumed that they would be the only cultists present, but it was only natural that, as Betelgeuse did, they had brought underlings to the city as well. That was the only explanation for such damage. Subaru, the 2 archbishops and the cultists under them, are they attacking the city right now? Ferris, on this matter, there are a variety of. Ferris's voice was bitter as he began to answer Subaru's conclusion. However, before she could confirm or deny it, an unexpected interruption came. That was Yahoo, Yahoo, Yahoo! The space rang with the sound of a high-pitched voice. The voice's relaxed tone contrasted sharply with the somber atmosphere, as if someone had accidentally tuned a TV channel of an entertainment program during a serious conversation. Subaru, WH what? Hearing the sound, Subaru looked around wildly, and, unable to find the owner, he immediately realized it's the source. Subaru's immediate impression of the sudden voice was that it sounded like it had come from a loudspeaker or radio, a thought that mirrored one he'd had this morning. Subaru, the city's radio broadcast magic? Hello, all you meat creatures. No matter how many times you've heard it, doesn't my beauty and my lovely voice excite you? Ka-ha-ha-ha-ha. As if verifying Subaru's idea, the voice appeared again, amplified by a magic speaker. That voice rang with a childlike cruelty, like a girl who'd spurned etiquette and trampled on conventional manners of speech. Her sharp laughter seemed able to pierce right into your mind, causing an aversion both mental and physical. Subaru, what a stupid voice this is. Ferris, hush, Subaru, quiet. Ferris straightened his ear with one finger and put another over her mouth. A serious Ferris seemed to be completely absorbed, and Ricardo wore a vigilant expression. The bedridden injured all clapped their hands over their ears. This didn't seem to be the first time they'd heard it. Alright, you meat creatures enthralled by a beautiful girl's enticing voice, I have news for you, we're all tired, so we're going home now. Just kidding. The true tossing and turning of day and night starts now. Ka-ha-ha-ha-ha. A harsh voice, like a mirror next to the ear being scratched with sharp claws, filled with sadistic glee. What was this voice, what was this woman? Forehead dripping with cold sweat, Subaru was well aware of his body's abnormal condition. As Subaru's mind turned, his body had been captured. Setting aside my funny, laugh-inducing joke, let's continue with the news. As I said just now, the city has been occupied by us. You're all caged birds, no, you're all insects in a cage for insects. Subaru. Insects are just bugs, and the owner of that cage gets to decide just what to do with you. Wings and head, prepare to have them removed. Ka-ha-ha-ha, how ugly, how awful. What a merciless life. You should be thankful for being left in my tender care. Ka-ha-ha-ha-ha. A repeated, malicious laugh. One which belonged to a presence which despised others and found vicious delight in ravaging their joy. Subaru knew this kind of presence better than anybody. Wait, you idiots can't understand the real meaning of my precious words. Poor incompetent fools, only thinking about slabs of meat in their free time. My gentle, loving self will make this easier to understand. I'll tell you with my spit which you masochists love. Subaru. Insects in a cage can't do anything about their owner's mood. The most you can do to please us is to lie fearfully in your cage. When we're in a bad mood, you can only tremble in fear as we tear your wings or legs off. When I bring you honey, I'll be like your mother, gently stroking you heads. Therefore, ka-ha-ha-ha-ha. In the face of that constant viciousness, Subaru imitated Ferris and listened silently. A breath, a word, muddy feelings in his chest stifled, Subaru sealed his will with iron. And then, he noticed. He noticed it. What was that? Later, we'll have more to ask of you, scum. You'll wear desperately ugly expressions, cry that you don't want to die and want to die in quantity, and think of ways to emerge from the crowd and give us answers. In that case, my moving kindness might have me consider setting down the cage in my hand. Guy, isn't that really easy to understand? Gah ha ha ha. With excitement, the speaker clapped, stomping her feet from her seat. Her speech, her attitude, her voice, Subaru found them all unbearably irritating, but that wasn't the problem at hand. From the beginning, he could hear that sound. He had thought that it had come from being in the same room as that magic device. Faintly accompanying that woman's voice was a sound that Subaru had certainly caught. However, he was unsure of what exactly that sound was. What was still worse was that he had almost, but not quite, reached the answer. Unknowing, unaware, unwitting. A noisy heartbeat, the noisy flow of his blood. Reject and understand, reject and understand. A very faint buzzing sound, like the flapping of a myriad of wings. He was very close, infinitely near the right solution. Although close, he wasn't quite there. A plume of flapping feathers, that was the noise that seemed to be mixed into the broadcast. Many magical phenomena were unclear to Subaru. So perhaps this was just his imagination. But Subaru's common sense felt that something was off. That sense of violation and that plume of feathers stuck in Subaru's mind. And the end. My precious words end here. Metamorphosing meat creatures and insects should work their hardest. Like I said before, we've taken control of the 4 towers that operate the waterways. I think it's best to not try anything weird. A drowned man's dead face is unbearable ugly. Gah ha 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 ha. That cruel high-pitched laughter was interrupted as the sound faded. That sound of wings was gone as well. Subaru could finally disengage his body, and he immediately flew over to Ferris and Ricardo. Subaru, what did you think of the broadcast just now? Ferris, what I think of it? Our limbs were mercilessly taken and we've been reduced to just a head, that's how Fairy-chan sees this. A bitter Ferris bit his fingers and replied to a frowning Subaru. Various places had become stages for the purpose of being seized by the enemy. Subaru, so just now, that was the witch cult. Ferris, the first broadcast came when Subaru-kyun was sleeping. In it, the broadcaster introduced herself. Ferris paused, looking unsure of whether or not he should continue. Subaru, ignorant of the reason for his hesitation, tilted his head. In the witch cult, the common practice among archbishops was to first announce their sin. After that came their name. The Sin Archbishop of Lust, the third archbishop that Subaru hadn't imagined would be present. Her name was Ferris. Although this is disgusting and Fairy-chan doesn't believe it in the slightest, this is the name that was given. Ferris said so, rendering the credibility of the testimony he was about to repeat very low. Ferris, Capella Emirata Lubunica. Although it couldn't be, it's a niam of royalty. Chapter 28, A Meeting Covered in Wounds. Subaru, wait, let's calm down. First, can we sort through what we know? Ferris's words had pushed the limit of what Subaru could handle right now. Ferris and Ricardo nodded at Subaru's raised hand as they considered the new information that had been broadcasted. Subaru, moving anywhere, will be pretty difficult with so many injured. Ferris, well, the most severe wounds have already been stabilized, and there shouldn't be any more people showing up, but still. With a sense of professionalism, Ferris gave his diagnosis. Subaru took a moment to examine the conditions of the field hospital. Minimal lighting and a ground of cold stone making ground. From the unique feel of its air, Subaru judged the place to be underground, almost like the parking lot of a large department store. Subaru, are we still in Pristella? Ferris, it's one of Pristella's shelters. The broadcast this morning mentioned it, remember? In Pristella, if an issue with the waterways ever occurred, the water damage would be troublesome, so there are shelters all over the city. This is one of the shelters on 1st Street. Ricardo, the square where I found Bro is close to here. After a rough start, we managed to bring Bro and the other refugees to safety. Following Ferris, Ricardo gave his proclamation as he pounded loudly on his thick breastplate. Ferris glared intently at Ricardo, who took several moments to stop. Ferris, it's lucky that Fairy-chan was also here, with so many people wounded. This dog-faced mister wouldn't have been able to handle any of the treatment. Ricardo, yep. Now I don't need to have any regrets. Ha ha ha. Ricardo's usual attitude and his laugh were refreshing, even if they were out of place for this somber hospital. If one person kept a positive attitude, everyone could maintain hope. Ferris, so, what happened to Subaru-kyun? Subaru, right. There were 2 archbishops in the square, Greed and Wrath. The one who destroyed my foot was Greed, who abducted Emilia, however, the one who caused the injury on everyone else was Wrath. Ferris, How did that happen? Subaru, the authority of wrath is. It's a little difficult to explain, but if anyone is injured, she has the power to transmit the injury to other people. He chose his words carefully, attempting to give a simple explanation of her power. Ricardo had his head tilted, and Ferris's complexion changed as he realized the implications of her ability. He looked to the wounded and looked at the strap of the right foot. Ferris, so, that's the reason why Subaru-kyun and everyone else had such a similar injury. I had a bad feeling already, but... Subaru, Absurd emotions often accompanied a distorted character. However, with Sirius, this absurdity was also physiological in nature. Subaru had still more to say. Subaru, and greed's also very troublesome. Ferris, Fairy-chan's already tired as is, I don't have the energy to hear about more troublesome things. Subaru, sorry, I don't think that's possible. That damned greed, he can invalidate any attack. Whether being bathed in fire, hit by a whip, or directly punched, all damage is null. The unconscious Amelia in Regulus's arms was defenseless. Even bathed in Sirius's flames, Regulus had flawlessly defended both himself and Amelia. That had resulted in a display of his unmanageable power. This would prove to be an incredibly tiresome situation. Ferris, a guy who can pass on injuries, and a guy who's invincible. You have to be kidding me. Subaru, that other archbishop. Betelgeuse' unseen hand was quite powerful, but this guy's on a completely different level. That said, Betelgeuse's ability had ended up not being effective on Subaru. Considering that ineffectiveness, Subaru had thought of him as a simple lunatic rather than a sin archbishop. Thus, this would be his first formal battle with the witch cult. Subaru, and the archbishop who just introduced herself, Lust, her abilities are probably just as troublesome. Ferris, worst of all. There are probably 5 archbishops here. Subaru, 5. Ferris uttered a hypothesis which was terrifying beyond Subaru's wildest imagination. What had happened to give him such an idea? Ferris sighed and straightened his finger at the subdued Subaru. Ferris, listen. Think of the broadcast of what Lust said. This city has 4 water gates, right? Subaru, right, they'd seized them, which means that they could be planning to sink the city, so, that's a very dangerous situation. Ferris, and there's the possibility of an archbishop occupying each. Already, there are 3 archbishops gathered in one place, which is completely unprecedented. So the worst of worst situation comes to mind, there are even more archbishops here. Subaru, 4, TCH. Speaking the number out loud, Subaru finally understood what Ferris wanted to say. There were 4 water gates, north, south, east, and west, which ran the city of Pristella. Occupying all of them implied. Subaru, so it could be that each tower has an archbishop guarding it? In that case, that should make 4 archbishops. Ferris, Subaru-kyun, consider what just happened. The broadcast just now used a magic which only exists in the city hall. The enemy must also occupy the central hub of the city, meaning that they've captured 5 strongholds. Subaru, hook. That even more hopeless speculation left Subaru breathless. Like Ferris said, the city hall must have been taken to give that broadcast. In addition to Lust, who occupied it, there must be 2 other archbishops. The only fathomable explanation for that would be a coordinated attack from the witch cult. Subaru, aside from the square I was in, has there been any other commotion? Have there been any other attacks? Ferris. If this were an offense by the witch cult, it would be difficult to imagine that they would only target a single location. Subaru could only pray that his worst fears of casualties wouldn't become a reality. Absent-mindedly, Ferris cast his gaze downward, falling silent. Ricardo gave a cough, a set of sharp teeth visible on the beastman's large face. Ricardo, honestly, the only situation we know is our own. We don't even know where the other shelters are, so it's in our best interest to stay here. Subaru, why? Shouldn't we look for our allies so that we can collaborate? Aren't you worried about them? That's right. As he spoke, Ricardo gestured with his hands, and Subaru hurriedly looked up at Ferris. In this shelter of wounded people, it was odd that Ferris and Ricardo were the only people Subaru knew. Especially when Ferris went here. Subaru, where are Crush-san and Wilhelm-san? It's unusual for you 3 to be separated. Are they in another shelter? Ferris, you're asking a difficult question, Subaru-kyun. The only ones you know here are Fairy-chan and the Mister, and as you can see. Ferris replied with a sense of unease, and Subaru felt a deep anxiety rise within himself. Then, a gentle voice relieved that intense atmosphere. Suddenly hearing that voice, Subaru looked up and around, unable to locate its owner. I'm sorry. I seem to have been worrying you, Ferris-chan. It's good to see you, Subaru-sama. Ferris, Crush-sama is such a meanie. Subaru, wah. Ha. Ferris, who was conversing with his invisible master, reached into his dress. Subaru watched with round eyes as he pulled out a familiar object. Subaru, wait, this is... Ferris, that's right. It's loot from a year ago. We used them too, remember? Ferris replied, revealing a hand mirror in his grip. At first glance, the mirror lacked any defining characteristic, but rather than show a reflection, its face reflected a green-haired beauty with a gentle face. Without a doubt, that was Crush. The magic device known as a conversation mirror was more or less this world's version of a cell phone, which lets its owners speak through paired mirrors. A year ago, they had played a role in the battle with the witch cult, and they had been brought to this city as well. Crush, opposite the mirror, frowned slightly before the silent Subaru. Crush, Ferris. Subaru-sama seems a little troubled. Did you hide this from him? Ferris, sorry about that. But, I didn't think our next call would be so soon, so I didn't think it was that important to tell him yet. Subaru, wait. Give me a moment. Thanks to the conversation mirrors, you're in contact with Crush, who's at another shelter, is that right? Crush, indeed. As Master and Knight talked, Subaru took a moment to sort through his confusion. The conversation mirror explained Ferris's calmness about his missing master. Tentatively, to confirm Crush's safety with his own eyes, Subaru took the mirror from Ferris. Subaru, thank goodness, is difficult to say right now with what's happening, but we're lucky that we could get in touch. Crush-san, are you hurt at all? Crush, no, thanks for your concern. Fortunately, I managed to find a shelter in time, without suffering any injury. I heard that Subaru-sama received a serious wound and had to be carried in. How are you doing? Subaru, I can't say anything like, I'm completely fine, but it's good enough. I'll do something. I'll move as soon as the wound is bandaged. Ferris, don't look at me like that. As Subaru announced his intent, he felt Ferris's harsh glare stabbing into him. However, although he was being ungrateful, Subaru couldn't sit by and do nothing. Breaking the deadlock they were in was of the utmost urgency. He couldn't lie around obediently, waiting for conditions to deteriorate. Subaru, we'll talk about this later. Crush-san, how's the situation in your shelter? Did anyone else make it there? Crush, yes. There are several others with me. Julius, I'm also here, Subaru. Fortunately, everyone who was in the hotel made it here. From somewhere behind Crush, an elegant voice joined the conversation. The moment he heard it, Subaru froze briefly before giving a sharp shake of his head. He didn't want to be a fool who didn't realize how encouraging that voice was. Subaru, your presence there is kinda reassuring, Julius. Julius, I heard you ended up being carried into your shelter unconscious. Since you've climbed back up with your usual liveliness, it seems that my worries were baseless. Is it true that Emilia-sama was abducted? Subaru, it's true. Sorry. I'm so useless. Julius, you were facing two archbishops. I'm not so awful a man as to blame you for a lack of strength. Anastasia-sama and Crush-sama are both here, as well as a few members of the Iron Fang. Two of Felt-sama's followers are here too. He quickly confirmed Emilia's status without holding Subaru accountable. Although the kindness from the other side of the mirror was touching, it amplified Subaru's feelings of guilt. While listening to his words, Subaru confirmed the presence of a wounded man in the refuge. Subaru, right, you should tell Felt's guys that their friend is here. He's wounded, but alive. Julius, I see, that's good to hear. I'll be sure to pass it on. They're trying to act brave, but they're obviously worried. Well then, Subaru. After Tun and Ken had been informed of Larkins' safety, Julius lowered his voice, changing the atmosphere of their conversation. Julius, what do we do? Subaru, I haven't a clue why you're asking me that. Julius, as Sloth had shown, you seem to have a knack for dealing with the witch cult. Maybe you could pull something unexpected and solve this dilemma? Subaru, what kind of nonsense is that? Sorry to disappoint, but I'm not some kind of witch cult expert. Julius, that's regrettable. Now, about Emilia-sama. There is no doubt that your heart is the most anxious. What do you want to do? Subaru's reply obviously hadn't answered Julius's expectations, but he wasn't discouraged. He understood that thinking of Subaru as some miraculous archbishop slayer would be too much to look for. Rather, the latter half of his sentence held his true question. Subaru, Emilia was taken by greed. He only spouts his own selfish beliefs and doesn't accept any disagreements. I don't want to leave Emilia with him for even a second. Julius, that is to say, to rescue Emilia from greed is your responsibility. Subaru, of course, did you just say responsibility? Julius spoke in a subdued tone as he showed Subaru an open palm, with 5 fingers outstretched. Julius, listen, Subaru. Ferris should have clarified that there are likely 5 archbishops at each of Pristella's key sites. Taking into account the status of each enemy, the division of the battle is a very important issue. Subaru. No matter from where, they can sink the Watergate city. Julius, that's right. The condition for defeating the archbishops is to attack each of those places at the same time. In the meantime, we have to re-establish contact with our forces, who are scattered across the city. You understand our situation, right? Although unable to get in touch with comrades in various places, Julius had put forth a plan of coordinated attack. Originally, the magic of the city was responsible for maintaining contact with those places. However, when the city hall had fallen, everyone had been separated and had sought refuge in different shelters. In order to judge the state of the other shelters, action needed to be taken. Ferris, by the way, will G confirm that there's a mob wandering the city. They seem to have lost their senses and are acting like cultists. Subaru, that would be that bastard Sirius's authority. Damn, this is looking more and more desperate by the second. Hearing Ferris's annoying piece of information, Subaru scratched his face in agitation as more bad news came to light. At the very least, there must be a way of getting in touch with all the existing combat forces. Subaru, I don't know where Otto and Garfield are, and Emilia's been kidnapped by Greed. What a mess. Julius, Joshua and Deputy Chief of the Iron Fang are both missing, as are Wilhelm Sama, Felt Sama, and Reinhardt. Priscilla Sama, too. Subaru, I don't know where Al and that garbage man are, but Priscilla should have been in the city park before the commotion started. I don't know what happened to her after that. Damn it, Liliana should be with her too. Priscilla wasn't normal in any sense of the word, and Liliana was also honestly very strange. Subaru didn't want either of them to be hurt. Taking into account Priscilla's proclaimed luck and that songstress's character, Subaru could only hope that they would be fine. Patrash had also been in the water plumage pavilion. She was smart enough to avoid attention, so worrying about her would be needless. Constant sources of worry plagued Subaru, and he felt that launching 5 simultaneous attacks was outside of the realm of possibility. No matter how it was said, it would be impossible. There weren't enough combatants to attack 5 locations, not to mention that they would be facing archbishops. The only thing most people could bring to such a fight was hope. Subaru. Wait. Why do we have to go after all 5 places at the same time? Julius, what do you mean? It's as we've already said. The witch cult can do tremendous damage from anywhere they occupy. Seizing one place would leave them with the rest. Subaru, it's not like that though, right? I understand that we need to seize all 4 towers eventually. But why at the same time? Julius, once they discover that they've been sabotaged in one location, it's a matter of course that the other archbishops would commence with their plans, no. That must be why they launched such a coordinated attack. Julius gave a clear response to Subaru's doubts. While listening to his words, Subaru pondered their accuracy. Of course, Julius's logic was clear and sound. But the opponents they faced weren't normal ones. In that square, Regulus and Sirius had fought lethally. Regulus hadn't been serious, and so he hadn't done much harm, but Sirius had definitely been intending to kill him. Regulus should have been able to defeat her in minutes. Those guys, could they really have worked together to capture the city? Subaru. Do they have any real sense of cooperation? Of course, they said that they'd collaborated to seize the Watergates, but can they keep an organized contact every step of the way? That's what I'm thinking. Julius, on what basis? Subaru, in the square I was at, 2 of the archbishops were trying to kill each other. They only stopped because they were given new instructions from the gospel. If they hadn't, one would probably have killed the other. Julius, so they can't coordinate properly. Julius still appeared faintly uncertain at Subaru's reply. Subaru understood his concern, however. Subaru, is there anyone with access to the outside? Julius, a couple members of the Iron Fang are scouting with an eye on the towers. What are you thinking? Subaru, although this could just be conjecture, isn't the simplest way of communication just casting magic signals in the air? In such a complex city, verbal communications is troublesome. At the very least, it would take a long time without a conversation mirror. Julius, the likelihood that the witch cult brought any such mirrors is low. My spirits would doubtlessly have detected them already. Right, that's it. They reached the same conclusion simultaneously. Subaru spoke first with an ah. Subaru, so they routinely make easily understood communications. If some type of commotion doesn't arise, or they fail to notice it, they don't act. And so, that reduces our need to disperse our combat forces. Julius. The only problem with this proposal is that one place is different from all the others. Subaru, the City Hall. The building that can inform the other towers of the attack. So we'd have to start with that one. The initial concentration of combat would be focused on the city's central office. They would have to go there and defeat the Archbishop of Lust with their current force, and destroy the other towers one by one afterward. Even then, it would be a test of speed, but the risk would be much lower than that of attacking all 5 locations at once. Subaru thought so, believed so. Julius. On the other side of the mirror, Julius fell into a thoughtful silence. Subaru's proposal was based on the poor relationship between Regulus and Sirius, optimistically assuming that the witch cult was a mess of messes. Of course, if the gospel had given a command like kill everyone in Pristella, that hope would be fundamentally subverted. If he'd known this was going to happen, he should have attempted to ask for the content of the gospel back then. My deepest apologies for being late, can everyone hear me? In the middle of a heavy silence, another voice suddenly joined the conversation. The weather-beaten, aged voice which Subaru so looked up to was more reliable than anything else in the present situation. The face of a white-haired old man was reflected in the conversation mirror. Subaru, Wilhelm-san. You're okay. Ferris, Wilgie. Thank goodness. You didn't get in touch, it made people worry. Ferris also heard a familiar voice. At their welcome, Wilhelm opened his eyes and nodded. Wilhelm, my apologies, I was caught up in some trouble and couldn't find a calm place. Now, finally, some citizens, and I have arrived at a shelter. Subaru Dano and Ferris, seeing your safety gives me peace. And Crush-sama? Crush, I'm fine. Wilhelm, I'm so glad you're safe. Wilhelm, don't worry about me, it was due to my powerlessness that I wasn't at your side in this situation. Please allow me to trouble you to wait quietly. I will find you. Subaru, amazing, this feeling of relief isn't normal. As Crush and Wilhelm spoke through the mirror, Subaru, finding that the dialogue between master and subordinate held an overwhelming sense of security, sighed with admiration for Wilhelm. Then, happy for his safety, Subaru ruminated his conversation with Julius as he attempted to organize a summary for Wilhelm. However, there are several things to be said, but this is the most urgent. At that moment, Wilhelm vanished from the mirror, replaced by a beastman, a kitten wearing a monocle. This was the deputy chief of the Iron Fang, Tivy, who seemed to have joined forces with Wilhelm. His expression was unusually anxious. Ricardo, hey. If it isn't Tivy. Your safety is better than anything else. Tivy, you too, chief, but we're not fine right now. Is my sister with you right now? Ricardo, Mimi? I haven't seen her, did something happen? At Tivy's feeble voice, Ricardo squinted into the mirror, where someone had replaced Tivy. Hitaro, chief. Sister. Sister was. Ricardo, Hitaro? Why are you in such a panic? The one who had flown into view was Tivy's identical brother, Hitaro. He was usually a mellow youth, but right now, his face was distorted with grief. Tears filled his round eyes, and his voice shook as he gazed into the mirror. Hitaro, our divine protection of trisection activated, for my sister. Her wound was so serious, and sister, she, hook. Tivy, brother, calm down. It's like he said. When sister was wounded, the wound also reached me and brother, so. Ricardo, understood. Wait there, I'll find Mimi immediately. Don't cry, just wait. In a voice lower than Subaru had ever heard from him, Ricardo spoke into the mirror. In that smooth sound, Subaru felt a pressure unlike any he'd felt before, and he stepped back, trembling. The beastman's eyes were full of anger, and his open mouth revealed a row of sharp canine teeth. He drew his blade, his large muscles tense. He almost appeared to be searching for the missing girl in that very moment. Anastasia, wait, Ricardo. I can't allow such an arbitrary action. The voice which stopped Ricardo from charging out came from another mirror. Ricardo turned back to face Anastasia, who'd claimed the mirror. He frowned, lifting his blade at his employer. Ricardo, don't stop me, lady. I don't want a kid with you right now. Anastasia, surely, Ricardo, our long bond would have you realize that I'm not kidding around. Don't make me say it again. Right now, unauthorized actions cannot be allowed. Even for Mimi's sake. Ricardo, are you asking me to abandon Mimi? Opening his mouth, the rage expelled from Ricardo's mouth shook the air of the shelter. That intensity was no laughing matter. Subaru stumbled several steps backward, away from the beast who emanated rage. Ricardo fixed his gaze on Anastasia. Through the mirror, she met it unflinchingly. Anastasia, you should understand, Ricardo. We've entered unforeseen circumstances. You are my most important weapon. I cannot let you leave without permission. Ricardo, you dare say this? Who do you think you're talking to, Annabo, TCH? Anastasia, you of course. Don't you forget, dog monster. The two spoke names only old acquaintances would recognize. His skin tingling with electricity, Subaru searched for a place to interject. He wanted to support Ricardo. But he could also understand Anastasia's sound opinion. And he was an outside. Anastasia, someone who wasn't, who held a close relationship with them, chose to prioritize the safety of the city over Mimi. Subaru realized that there was nothing for him to interrupt. Ricardo, too, should understand. Subaru. In this way, time trickled on. If Ricardo forced his exit, the injured Subaru and non-combatants couldn't stop him. Anastasia, who looked coolly into his eyes from across the magic mirror, only she could do anything. However, Ricardo suddenly turned his head away from the mirror's gaze. Subaru, wait, Ricardo. Anastasia, stop, don't rush to make a conclusion. Seeing Ricardo's movement, Anastasia spoke. Ricardo gave a silent response. He turned back and sniffed at the entrance to the shelter. Ricardo, something's close by. What is this? The scent of blood. Subaru, the scent of blood. Among so many wounds, he seemed to be able to detect a fresh scent. Alert, Ricardo held his blade to the entrance of the shelter. Subaru and Ferris swallowed, watching Ricardo's judgment. Hook. Heavy footsteps cast a shadow over the refuge of the shelter. In that moment, the patients in the shelter, intimidated by the insolence of the intruder, held their collective breath. It was none other than Subaru who broke that silence. Standing there was a familiar short, blonde figure. Subaru, Garfield. A sweaty, panting Garfield. Suddenly noticing Subaru, he ran over with a strange wobble in his step. Then, Subaru noticed why Garfield's movements were so shaky. Garfield. Everyone was lost for words as Garfield reached Subaru. There, he bowed his head and sank to his knees, kneeling. Garfield, sorry, Captain, Hook. My amazing self is worthless. Incompetent, Hook. After saying so, Garfield raised a pained cry. Lying in his bloodied arms was the figure of a dying Mimi. End of chapters 26 to 28, Spear of Love.